On today's episode of Rethink Real Estate, we're going to go through and talk about how are you managing your own expectations. I think this is the first step in understanding how are you managing your expectations when it comes to market value of your listings or of your clients' properties prior to actually going to them to educate them on market. I think that we just need to be aware of a few things at the moment and be very, very self-aware of how we handling the situation of educating ourselves on the market. And are we trying to prop up the real estate market for our clients and protect them by not giving them the information and us not wanting to find out the information? Hopefully I can take you through a bit of a strategy to reevaluate your expectations of each of your listings and how often you should do it. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Hey team, and welcome to today's practical episode. One of the topics that I wanted to go through today is sort of walking through something that's becoming a little bit more prevalent to me is the fact that, yes, sellers' expectations are a little out of line with the marketplace in many of the places that we are at the moment, and it's taking a little bit more time for properties to sell, whether you're traditional or your auction. However, the thing that's been very obvious to me is the fact that it's not only the sellers' expectations that are a little bit skewed of the marketplace based on what they want / what they need. Most of the time at the moment, it is what they want versus what they actually need. But it's actually the agents. So you, who I'm actually probably talking to, most of our audience and probably over 95% of our audience is real estate agents, regardless of where you are in the world at the moment. But the reality is that it's funny how when we go through the exercise that we do when a new auction comes on to the team, we go through this process internally where we do seller's expectations, which is their non-disclosed reserve price. So let's just use an example that the seller might want $1.2 million for the property. Then we ask what the public price is. That is a question to the agent of, hey, what they really do believe that the property is worth. Now, don't get me wrong, is that over 81% of the properties that we take through to the auction process have been sitting on the marketplace traditionally for whether it be 14, 30, 45, 60 plus days, is that the agent doesn't have really much of an argument when it comes to the fact that, oh no, it's really worth what the list price is. I just don't know why it's not selling, when it's like, well, hang on a second. You've been on the marketplace for X amount of time and you don't have any offers to show at that level and nobody's taking any action. So with all due respect, I don't believe that it is worth that amount. However, so going back through is that we go through the reserve price or the seller's expectation, the public price, what we believe that the property will sell for in 60 days time. And that is the opinion of the listing agent. So the listing agent will say somewhere in the vicinity of, usually it's pretty close to the list price. It's like, well, if it's listed at say 1.199, the agent will typically say, well, I think it's probably worth 1.150 based on the comparatives and so on and so forth. And then we go into the 24-hour price. And it's funny because the 24-hour price is a process of asking the agent a question of what do you believe that the property will sell for in the next 24 hours? Gun to your head, okay? And if you can't sell it within the next 24 hours, then the trigger goes off. Think about it this way, Mr. Agent, is that if you were to sell the property for this price, you will never get another listing ever again in that marketplace because you undersold it so much. And, you know, it's really difficult for an agent to actually comprehend and understand that a lot of the time. So it takes a little bit of time, but you might say if the listing's at $1,199,000, they say that $1,150,000 is what they think they could sell it for within the next 60 days. They might say 24-hour price is, $1,050,000 or $1,001,000 or probably more likely $1,001,000 to be honest. And then we go back through and we say to them is that, okay, great. So the feedback level that we do set on the property is $1,001,000 if that's the 24-hour price, where unless we have an offer over that number where it's ratified in writing, we need to have an agreement between the both of us that you will go back through and we will question all of the buyers from a feedback perspective if they're above that number. So let's say that the buyer says, that they think that it's worth 1.2. Great. Our next follow-up question will be, will you put that in paper? No. Okay. Well, would you put 1.15 on paper? No. Okay, great. Would you put 1.1 on paper? No. So then you can say to the seller, instead of saying the buyer thought it was 1.2, you can say that the buyer would not write an offer of 1.1. So let me just take you through that one more time, just so that we're very clear on this, is that this is the internal process that we go through. Seller's expectation, which is their non-disclosed reserve price. You can do this in traditional real estate as well. So seller's expectation, what will they sell the property for? They've told you they'll sell it for 1.2 million. Okay, great. What's it worth in 60 days? If it's not worth 1.2, what do you believe that the property really is based on the comparables worth within the next 60 days? Now, keep in mind, this is a property that's been on the marketplace for a period of time, but you can do it to a fresh property on the market, but you've got to continue as a listing agent to go through and evaluate your expectations of this property on a consistent basis. Okay, whether it be weekly, whether it be every 2 weeks, it just depends really on how different the marketplace is or what the lack of response is like. Now again, going back, public price, what do we think it's worth within the next 60 days? Probably $1,050,000, right? $1,150,000, sorry, $1,150,000. Okay, so then the 24-hour price. Okay, well, yeah, a 1.1. All right, are you sure? Maybe $1,075,000. Okay, all right, great. So then there's an unwritten ground rule that if a buyer says to you that they believe that it's worth, or an agent says that they believe that it's worth X amount of dollars and it's above that number, you need to walk them back to the point that they will place an offer, all the way back to that number of $1,075,000 or the 24-hour price, so that your seller doesn't have an inflated expectation of market value. But where I'm going with all of this, it's not an education lesson at this point. It is actually the interesting part about it is that the agent themselves is even getting the 24-hour price wrong. This is about managing your own expectations as much as it ultimately is the sellers. And I say this with as much love and affection for our community on Rethink Real Estate as I possibly can have, is that you are not adjusting quick enough to sometimes the market moving too fast in the sense of going backwards. Now, the other thing that possibly could be the case is that you just need to give the property more time on the market. But I believe that that is a level of gambling that you shouldn't be taking with your clients. Okay. Because if you get a week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks down the path and nothing has changed, you've got accumulated days on market, and that property's reputation is starting to become very stagnant and tarnished. It already has been after it's been on the market 2 weeks without a price reduction. I believe it already has if it's been on the marketplace 10 days. I've got a property close to me at the moment, and we live in Eastside Costa Mesa. There's one property on the marketplace for $3,190,000. I'm watching it very closely because it's an older property than what mine is, and all of these different things. And usually, that anything in between $5 and $3 million will sell within 3 or 4 days. This property has been on the marketplace for 14 days. And it's got me thinking, oh dear, it hasn't gone pending, it hasn't gone under contract. It's a decent property. There's so many that have been around it that have been on the marketplace. So don't think that they're not watching this as well as sellers, and you need to watch it as well from a market-driven perspective. You need to understand what is going on in your own market, and you need to constantly be moving and reevaluating your thought process on what a property is worth. Just because you do the comps once and then 2 weeks later you think that it's still worth that amount of money, it might not be. So continuing to go back through this and reevaluate it. And maybe it's not a good idea to use 30-day old comps. Maybe it's not a good idea to use 2-month old comps. It's definitely not a good idea to use 3 to 4 month old comps, based on the fact that the market that you're in here and now is very different. So I think that what you've got to really do when it comes to managing your own expectations is do this exercise on a constant basis for yourself. What does the seller want? Now, why would I constantly do that? To see if whether or not you're educating them and their expectations are coming down further. It's one of the constant things that I actually see when a third party comes involved in the situation. An agent will reach out to me, Ben, can you discuss auction with our sellers? No problem, we discuss it. One of the first questions that comes out of my mouth, Mr. and Ms. Seller, what would you take for your property? What's the number that you would accept? And that number that comes out of their mouth is far lower than what they've ever told their agent, and the agent is shocked. Public price, what do you think as an agent you can sell it for within the next 60 days? That's the reevaluation of what you've probably got to look at. And then the 24-hour price, gun to your head, okay? You'll never sell another property again in that marketplace because you unbelievably undersell that property. But what do you know you could get an offer on this property for within 24 hours if you were to put a price on it? Okay, these are the questions that constantly need to be asking, probably reevaluating every week. These are things that you should do to manage your own expectations, because I often find that when I'm involved in a conversation with an agent about recent comps and this property just sold and that one just sold, they're talking about a 30, 45-day close on that property, and the marketplace is entirely different. Might be a little bit better, might be worse. But the likelihood in most marketplaces at the moment is that it is worse. We're not getting abundance of buyers anymore in any marketplace. So the reality is that if one buyer bought something 30 days ago, that means there's one less person within that marketplace to operate with. So that at the end of the day, that person that bought that property that's a direct comparative to this property means that this property is probably worth less now because the best buyer for that property has actually purchased something else. So these are all things that you need to constantly evaluate. I believe you should be doing it every week. And you should be basing it based on the volume of interest and volume of inquiry that you're getting. Numbers through the open houses, yes. Number of people that are willing to take action, yes. But then it's also in your follow-up phone calls that you make through to these buyers and agents of going, hey, you were at 123 Smith Street. What were your thoughts on that property? Sure, whatever. Their feedback is their feedback. But asking them, great, so what do you think the property is worth? Directly asking them, well, I'm not really too sure. So, okay, well, what do you think of the current list price on the property if it's a traditional listing? Oh, I think it's fine. Great. Well, would you offer that current list price? No, we wouldn't. We're not really the right buyer for it. At what point would you be the right buyer? What type of deal would it need to be for you to become a buyer for it? I'm not saying you have to buy it. I just want to know what deal would it have to be for you to be inspired in order to purchase this property? These are types of questions that I don't give a shit who you are. You don't ask. And it bothers the shit out of me because you're not getting the true story and you're keeping the marketplace elevated in your own mind. So it doesn't mean you have to display that to your sellers as well. So manage your own expectation. Learn to do that first. Then we can talk about some skill sets in order to manage your client's expectation at this point. But you're the problem and you're getting in the way of actually finding out what's really happening if a property isn't selling. If it doesn't sell within the first 10 days, folks, you have an issue. Okay. And maybe, yes, it might be more time on the market, but you run the risk of that not being the case. And then too little, too late, you are then chasing the market down on your client's behalf. Hopefully it helps. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.